I kept my successful business secret for years, and when my family finally discovered my net worth, everything fell apart. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in Ohio, and for as long as I can remember, my family never really believed in me. I grew up in a house where my father's voice carried more weight than anyone else's. Richard Hayes, he liked to be in control of everything. What we ate, where we went, how we lived. He had this way of reminding me, almost daily, that I wasn't going to amount to much. If I showed interest in something, he'd cut me down with a sharp comment. If I dreamed too big, he'd laugh, like the idea of me succeeding was some sort of joke. Then there was my sister, Melissa. She was only 2 years younger, but she lived as though the world owed her applause. She'd boast about the smallest things, an average job, a new dress, a date that went well, and my parents would nod like she had cured cancer. Meanwhile, if I brought home good grades or worked late shifts to save money, it was brushed off like it didn't matter. Melissa wasn't just proud of herself. She made it her mission to make sure I felt small beside her. Those years shaped me in ways I didn't realize until much later. I learned to keep my thoughts to myself, to stay quiet when I wanted to fight back. I also learned that if I wanted something for myself, I couldn't expect anyone else in my family to understand or support it. So, I stopped talking about my goals. I stopped sharing what I was working on. At some point, it just became easier to carry everything alone. When I was in my late 20s, I started my own business. It wasn't flashy. No neon signs, no social media bragging, no friends posting about it. Just me, building something piece by piece, keeping my head down and my plans quiet. I told no one in my family about it, not because I was ashamed, but because I already knew how they would react. They'd either laugh, dismiss it, or demand to know what they could get from it. I worked long hours. I sacrificed weekends. There were nights when I barely slept, and mornings when I questioned if I was doing the right thing. But slowly, piece by piece, things began to grow. My company became stable, then profitable, then successful. And through all of it, I stayed the same on the outside. I kept driving my old Ford, wearing simple clothes, living in a way that didn't catch attention. It wasn't about pretending to be someone else. It was about keeping my peace. My business was the one thing I could control, the one thing that couldn't be twisted or poisoned by my father's voice or my sister's jealousy. And for years, keeping it to myself felt like the only way to protect it. When I think back to my younger years, it's almost painful how predictable things always were. Every time I talked about wanting to build something for myself, my family treated it like a joke. If I mentioned an idea, my father would scoff and call me a dreamer, like dreaming was some kind of disease I needed to shake off. He believed in steady jobs, hard labor, and keeping your head down. Anything outside of that wasn't just foolish in his eyes, it was impossible. He told me more than once that I'd never make real money, not in a million years. It wasn't just his words, though. It was the tone he used. Sharp, certain, final. He didn't argue with me. He dismissed me, as if what I wanted didn't deserve discussion. My sister thrived in that environment. Melissa was the golden child, even though she never did anything remarkable. If she landed a job at some small office, she made sure everyone knew, and my father would beam like she'd landed on the moon. If she bought a new pair of shoes, my mother would gush as though it were proof she was moving up in the world. Me? I could have worked double shifts for weeks, come home exhausted but proud of what I'd saved, and it wouldn't matter. My father would still find a way to twist it. He'd say something like, "Working yourself to the bone for pennies doesn't make you a man, Daniel." And Melissa would laugh, just loud enough to make sure I heard. She liked to act like my failures were entertainment. The hardest part wasn't their mockery, it was my mother. Linda wasn't cruel like the others. She didn't laugh or belittle me. She just stayed quiet. When my father cut me down, she'd stare at the table, avoiding my eyes. When Melissa made her little digs, my mother would pretend she hadn't heard. I always wondered if she wanted to defend me, but felt trapped between us and my father. Maybe she thought silence was safer. Maybe she thought that was love, to avoid making it worse. But to me, her silence was as heavy as his insults. It meant I was alone in that house. That's why, when I started building my business, I kept it to myself. I had no desire to hear my father call it stupid or watch Melissa sneer. I didn't want to see my mother look at me with that pained silence again, torn between her son and her husband. So I shut it all away. I kept every plan, every risk, every small victory locked inside. No one knew what I was doing because I refused to give them the chance to poison it. Keeping that distance created a wall between us, and over time, that wall hardened into resentment. They pushed me into silence, but in that silence, I started to realize just how much I didn't need them. The more they mocked, the stronger my resolve became. I knew then that if they ever found out what I had built, they wouldn't see it as my achievement. They would see it as theirs to claim. Melissa's birthday came around in late spring, and as usual, she made a big show of it. She sent out invitations, called everyone, and made sure no one could forget. I hadn't wanted to go. Every year it felt the same, her sitting at the center of attention, everyone else orbiting around her. But my mother called and asked me to come, and though I hesitated, I finally gave in. I told myself it was just a dinner, a few hours, then I could go home and be done with it. When I arrived, the restaurant was already buzzing with people. Melissa had chosen a place far nicer than she could reasonably afford, but that was her style, loud, polished, and always trying to prove something. She was glowing when she saw me, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. To her, my presence was more about appearances than family. The evening started harmless enough. Small talk, laughter that felt rehearsed, clinking glasses. Melissa bragged about a minor promotion at work, and my father clapped her on the back as if she'd achieved something monumental. I kept my head down, ate my food, and tried not to be noticed. Then came the moment that changed everything. One of the guests, a man named Paul, who knew Melissa through a friend, leaned across the table to me. "Hey, Daniel," he said casually. "I think I drove past your office the other day. That place on Westfield Road, Hayes Logistics, right? Looks like you're doing well for yourself." The words hung in the air like a spark in a dry field. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I could feel every pair of eyes at that table shift toward me. Melissa tilted her head, narrowing her eyes, her smile fading into suspicion. "Office?" she asked, her voice sharp but coated with fake sweetness. "I thought you were just freelancing. Since when do you have an office?" I forced a laugh, brushing it off. "Oh, it's just a small space I rent sometime. Nothing major." I wanted to move past it quickly, but the damage was already done. Melissa's eyes didn't leave me, and I could tell she was turning the thought over in her mind, piecing things together. My father raised a brow, but he didn't push the issue. Not yet. He was the type to tuck information away until the right moment to use it. My mother looked between us, silent as always, though I caught a flicker of confusion on her face. The rest of the night passed, but I felt the shift. Conversation moved on, yet Melissa kept circling back, asking small questions that sounded casual but weren't. "So how often do you go to that office? Do you have employees, or is it just you?" I deflected each one, but I knew she wasn't going to let it go. By the time the dinner ended, I could feel it in my gut. Something had been planted in Melissa's mind, and knowing her, she wouldn't rest until she dug up the whole story. That night, I realized the secret I had kept so carefully for years might not stay hidden much longer. It didn't take Melissa long to act. She had always been jealous, always the type to dig when she felt someone had more than her. After that birthday dinner, she couldn't let it go. I didn't know it at the time, but she went as far as hiring a private investigator. She wanted proof, something solid she could hold in her hand. And she got it. The investigator dug through public records, company filings, business registrations, all the things I had kept quiet but couldn't completely hide. Melissa discovered everything. She found out about my logistics company, the office space, and most damaging of all, an article that listed my estimated net worth. When she saw the number, $8.4 million, she must have felt like she had struck gold. To her, it wasn't about pride in her brother. It was about ammunition. A week later, she arranged a family dinner. My mother called me, saying Melissa just wanted to have us all together again. I had no idea what was coming. I walked into her house, sat down at the table, and tried to prepare myself for another evening of shallow conversation. Instead, I walked into a trap. Partway through the meal, Melissa stood up with a smile that didn't feel natural. She held a folder in her hands, thick with papers. "I have something to share," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. She pulled out printed documents, laying them on the table like cards in a game she knew she'd already won. "Our dear Daniel has been keeping secrets. Big ones." I froze as she slid the papers across to my father. He squinted at them, his face twisting as he read. Melissa went on, her voice loud, theatrical, making sure every detail landed like a punch. "He owns a company, not just some little side project, a full business. And guess what? According to this," she tapped a highlighted line, "he's worth more than $8 million. The room went silent. My mother's eyes widened as she reached for the papers. Her lips parted, but no words came out. My father's face darkened, his hands gripping the table. Then his voice boomed. "8 million? You've been hiding this from us?" I tried to speak, but Melissa cut me off, her tone sharp and cruel. "He lied to us, Dad. He pretended to struggle while sitting on a fortune. He betrayed his own family." My mother finally spoke, her voice soft but heavy. "Daniel, why didn't you tell us?" The look in her eyes wasn't pride. It was hurt, as if I had wronged her by keeping my life private. I felt the walls close in around me. Their eyes, their voices, all pressing in. Richard demanded answers. Melissa smirked like she had finally put me in my place, and Linda's silence begged me to explain. But what explanation would they accept? To them, my success wasn't mine. It was something they believed they were owed. Sitting there, surrounded and ambushed, I felt nothing but disgust. The night Melissa exposed me was only the beginning. By the next morning, everything had changed. My phone buzzed nonstop. Missed calls, unread texts, voicemails stacking up one after another. It wasn't concern or curiosity. It was demands. My father was the loudest. His first voicemail was almost calm, but the words carried weight. "Daniel, we need to talk. You've been keeping money from your family, and it's time you step up. We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head. Now you owe us. Call me back." The next messages grew harsher, his tone sharper. He didn't see me as a son anymore. He saw me as a wallet. Melissa came at me in her own way. She sent long texts, paragraphs filled with self-importance. She claimed she deserved a share of my business since she was the one who found out and exposed the truth. "If it weren't for me," she wrote, "you'd still be hiding, living like some hermit. I basically saved you from yourself. The least you could do is make me a partner." She wasn't joking. She genuinely thought her snooping entitled her to millions. My mother's messages were softer, but no easier to take. She didn't demand with anger, she pleaded. She said she and my father were behind on bills, that credit cards had piled up, that the house needed repairs. "If you could just help us get back on our feet," she wrote, "it would mean so much." Unlike my father or Melissa, she didn't insult me. But beneath her words was the same expectation, that my money was theirs to take. At first, I stayed quiet. I ignored the calls, left the messages unread. But the silence didn't last. They showed up at my office, called me during meetings, cornered me at my apartment. Each time, their words grew sharper. My father stood in front of me one night, his face red with anger, and said, "Don't you dare forget who made you. Everything you have is because of us." I finally pushed back. I told them no. I reminded them how they treated me when I had nothing, how my ideas were mocked, how my efforts were ignored, how their words left me alone in that house for years. When I was struggling, where were you? I asked. You laughed. You dismissed me. Now that I've built something, suddenly you think you're owed. You're not. They didn't take it well. Melissa called me selfish. My father called me ungrateful. Even my mother, with her soft voice, said, "You have so much, Daniel. Why can't you share with the people who love you?" But that was the truth I couldn't ignore anymore. Their love was never about me. It was about what they could get. And now that I refused to hand it over, the names they called me cut deeper than any silence ever had. It didn't take long for their demands to turn into something uglier. One morning, while I was in the middle of a meeting at my office, the front desk called to say my father was downstairs. I told them to send him away, but before I knew it, he was storming through the door, red in the face. He didn't even greet me. He slammed his hand on my desk and said, "This is ridiculous. You're rolling in money while your family struggles. From now on, I expect a monthly check. A family salary. It's the least you can do for everything I gave you." I told him flat out that it wasn't going to happen. His voice rose, shaking the walls. He said I was ungrateful, a disgrace, that I'd forgotten where I came from. He didn't leave quietly either. He marched out shouting, making sure my employees heard every bitter word. I thought Melissa would be easier to deal with, but she proved me wrong. A week later, I got papers delivered to my office. She was suing me. Her claim? That I had used family money to start my company. It was a complete lie. I had built every piece of my business on my own. Not $1 came from them. Still, she thought dragging me into court would force me to settle and hand her a piece of what I worked for. What shocked me the most wasn't her filing the lawsuit. It was realizing she had gotten her hands on old paperwork. Bank records, receipts, scraps of financial history from years ago. At first, I couldn't figure out how she got them. Then it became clear. My mother had given them to her. Linda, the one who always stayed quiet, the one who never defended me but pretended to care in her own way. She was helping Melissa. I confronted her about it. I asked her why she would hand over private things, why she would side with Melissa knowing it was all lies. She didn't deny it. She just looked at me with tired eyes and said, "She's your sister, Daniel. She deserves a chance too." Those words cut deeper than anything my father or Melissa had said. It wasn't about fairness or truth. It was about choosing them over me again. That was the moment everything shifted. My father's anger I expected. Melissa's greed I saw coming. But my mother's betrayal, quiet, hidden, and dressed up as love, that's what broke something in me. I realized then they didn't care who I was, what I had built, or what it cost me. They only cared about what I could give them. The people who should have supported me from the beginning had turned into enemies the moment they saw a dollar sign. And standing there with those papers in my hand, I knew there was no going back. After the lawsuit was filed and my father's shouting match at my office, I knew I couldn't let things sit any longer. They were pushing too hard, circling like vultures, and if I didn't take control, they'd find a way to sink their claws deeper. So I called my lawyer. We sat down for hours, going through every account, every piece of paperwork, every corner of my business. I locked everything down. New protections, tighter access, nothing left exposed. We restructured the company, moved parts of it into trusts, and set up barriers that no one outside of me could touch. If Melissa thought she could twist a court into handing her something, she'd be disappointed. If my father thought he could bully his way into my accounts, he'd find nothing waiting for him. I made sure of it. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small measure of relief knowing my work was safe. But safety wasn't enough. I couldn't just close the door and ignore them. That would only fuel their anger and give them more reason to come at me harder. Instead, I decided to take a different path. I would let them think they still had a chance. I would let them show me just how far their greed would stretch. So I changed my approach. The next time my father called, demanding money, I didn't hang up. I told him I was thinking about it. When Melissa cornered me, saying she deserved something for being family, I didn't shut her down. I nodded, pretended to listen, and said I'd look into it. My mother asked again for help with debts, and I gave her the same careful line. I made it sound like I was open to helping them, but never actually agreed to anything. Behind the scenes, I was watching them. Each conversation, each text, each visit, they grew bolder. The more I pretended to consider, the greedier they became. My father started talking about exact amounts, like a paycheck he thought he could collect from. Melissa began pushing for ownership, saying she could help run things if I just gave her a slice of the company. My mother asked for larger sums, hinting at problems she had never spoken of before. Every word they spoke confirmed what I already knew. They didn't want me, they wanted what I had. And the more they showed their true colors, the more certain I became about what I had to do. Revenge wasn't about yelling or fighting. It was about letting them dig their own hole, giving them the rope, and watching them tie the knot themselves. I kept my tone polite, calm, even reassuring. On the surface, I was the son and brother who might give in. Underneath, I was building the plan that would cut them off for good. I knew if I wanted to end things once and for all, I couldn't just say no and walk away. My family would never stop pushing. They needed to believe they were about to get everything they wanted, right up until the moment the ground gave way beneath them. That's why I set up the dinner. I chose a high-end restaurant downtown, the kind of place with chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and waiters in black suits. It was the kind of spot Melissa loved to flaunt, the kind my father would usually complain was too fancy, but secretly enjoyed. I called each of them and told them it was my treat. That alone softened them, made them eager. By the time they arrived, they were smiling, dressed up, acting like a family that had never been broken. We ordered food, talked casually, and for a while it almost felt normal. Then I cleared my throat and laid the bait. "I've been thinking," I said, making sure to sound hesitant, almost generous. "Maybe it's time I bring the family into what I've built. I can't give away ownership of my company, but I've decided to create something else, a family investment fund. I'll put in $500,000 to start." The reaction was instant. My father leaned forward, his eyes sharp, already calculating. Melissa gasped, her mouth forming a perfect little smile as if she had just won the lottery. Even my mother's expression softened, relief and hope flashing across her face. For the first time in weeks, none of them were angry with me. They were eager, grateful even. I pulled out a stack of documents. My lawyer had drawn them up carefully. They looked official, complicated, exactly the sort of thing that made people want to skim instead of read. "These papers are just to formalize it," I explained, "so there's no confusion later. Each of you gets a stake in the fund, equal shares." They didn't ask questions. They didn't read more than a line or two. Melissa scribbled her name first, smiling as she slid the paper back like she was signing her way into a fortune. My father followed, barely glancing before pressing his pen down hard, his signature bold across the page. My mother hesitated for a moment, her brow furrowed, but the promise of money won her over. She signed too, her hand shaking only slightly. I gathered the papers, slipping them back into my folder. Inside, I felt a rush of satisfaction. They thought they had claimed a piece of my success, but in truth, they had signed away every possible right to it. The contracts barred them from ever seeking ownership, profits, or control of my company. If they tried to sue again, these documents would destroy their case. I smiled across the table, playing my part. "I'm glad we can finally work together," I said. They smiled back, believing they had won. But in that moment, I knew the opposite was true. The trap had closed, and they didn't even realize it. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. A few days after the dinner, word started spreading. Melissa had been telling anyone who would listen that she was now a co-owner of my business. She bragged to her friends, dropped hints at work, and even posted about how her life was about to change. She walked around with her head higher than usual, convinced she was finally on my level, or above it. Her downfall came fast. She marched into a bank, waving the signed contract like it was her golden ticket. She applied for a line of credit, claiming she had rights to my company and its assets. The banker looked through the paperwork, read the fine print, and told her the truth. The contract didn't give her ownership of anything. It barred her from ever claiming a single piece of it. She walked out humiliated, her little fantasy torn apart. The news traveled quickly through the family. Soon after, my father showed up at my office again, angrier than I had ever seen him. He slammed the contract down on my desk and shouted, "What the hell is this? You tricked us." His face was red, his fists clenched. "You promised us a share, and instead you gave us nothing." I stayed calm. I opened the folder, pointed to the key section, and said, "You signed away every possible claim to my business. You're legally entitled to nothing." My voice didn't rise. I didn't match his anger. I just laid the truth in front of him, plain and sharp. He stared at me like I had betrayed him, as if years of insults, demands, and greed were suddenly erased by that one moment. Melissa barged in soon after, her face twisted with fury. "You'll pay for this," she hissed. "You can't cheat your own family." My mother was behind her, tears streaming down her face. She didn't yell like the others. She just kept saying my name, over and over, as if pleading would change the reality in front of her. The room erupted. My father shouted, Melissa threatened, my mother cried. Their voices tangled together, a storm of anger and desperation. But I felt strangely calm, almost detached. I looked at each of them and saw not a family but people who had shown me, over and over, what I truly meant to them, a source of money. Nothing more. I gathered the contracts, slid them back into the folder, and stood. Their voices kept rising, but I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain. I had given them enough chances, and they had shown me exactly who they were. I walked past them, out the door, and didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I cut all contact. No calls, no visits, no explanations. They had signed away their hold on me, and I was finally free. Months passed after I walked out on them, and life took on a new rhythm. My company grew faster than I expected. New contracts came in, my team expanded, and I had more freedom than ever before. For the first time, I woke up without the weight of constant demands or angry phone calls. My peace was worth more than any number in my bank account. Meanwhile, my family's world unraveled. Word got around about Melissa's failed stunt at the bank, and her reputation took a hit. People stopped taking her seriously. She maxed out her credit cards trying to keep up appearances, but without money flowing in, it all came crashing down. She lost her apartment, sold off her belongings, and ended up with nothing but debt. My father, Richard, grew more bitter by the day. He had built his life around control, barking orders and demanding respect. But when it came to me, he realized he had none left. He called a few more times, his voice hoarse and angry, but when I didn't answer, he stopped. From what I heard through others, he spent most days grumbling about me, blaming me for everything that went wrong in his life, as if my success had stolen something from him. My mother's fall was quieter. Linda had always been caught between us, but after siding with Melissa, she found herself alone. My father's anger and Melissa's bitterness pushed her into a corner, and she no longer had me to lean on. She sent letters, carefully written, heavy with guilt and pleading. She wrote about how the family was struggling, how she missed me, how things could be different if I'd just come back. I read the first one, then set it aside. When more came, I stopped opening them. The words never changed. They weren't about me, they were about money, about pulling me back into the cycle I had finally escaped. In the quiet of my own life, I saw things clearly. They hadn't just turned on me when money entered the picture. They had always been that way. The money just stripped away the mask. What I had built, I built alone, and what I had left behind wasn't family, not in the way it should have been. I never answered their letters. I never picked up the phone. I didn't drive by their house or check in to see how they were doing. Cutting them off wasn't an act of cruelty. It was the only way to survive. The truth is, I didn't hide my success out of shame. I hid it because I knew they'd destroy it. And when they proved me right, I finally set myself free. That was my revenge. Not loud, not flashy, but final.